Hello again. This is Steve Flanders again. This is 15 Minutes to Save America, episode 4. We're going to go into what happens if we actually get rid of corporate personhood and why that's such a good idea. The thing I see is without corporate personhood, a lot of times negotiations about business on the local or state level would be a much more cooperative venture. It'd be like the round table. Everybody kind of sitting in it as equals. What we have today is a very adversarial negotiation. It's workers versus management versus consumers versus environmentalists versus healthcare people. And nobody's on the same side. Nobody's really working together. Everybody's just trying to get what they want out of it. And that seems like the normal thing to do. But before corporate personhood, with chartering under the control of and guidance of local communities through their local government or state government, it was a much more cooperative venture. We came as equals, like I say, in a round table, not so much figuring out how to get over on each other, but how we could cooperatively incorporate this new enterprise or this new technology to the benefit of the community. And that's the biggest thing that would happen if we got rid of corporate personhood. The thing that befuddled an awful lot of European-style socialists about America is that so many of the working people have a sympathy for the need for businesses to make a profit. They never could understand why we were on their side, but in the older system, when we were working cooperatively, the normal person saw the businessman as kind of a working class hero. He was the person that was putting it together, creating work for everybody else, living within the community, not taking this excessive amount of profit out of it, but working as a cooperative member, a pillar of the community, a working class hero. And a lot of that has still come through in America. There's not nearly as much resentment of the rich as there is in other European countries. Erin Brockovich is the name that has come up. Movie about her by that name, starring Julia Roberts. She's and still is an activist that works to try and reduce corporate pollution and working to clean up the environment. I heard her on a talk show or a podcast once, and she bemoaned the idea that she personally knew a lot of executives working in industry and working in the corporate world who sympathized with her, agreed with her, but that they were not going to voice those opinions in the boardroom because in those boardrooms, their only duty, their legal duty, is to promote corporate profit, to defend the financial interests of the stockholders, and that's it. And so, if they were to bring up some of these issues about how to benefit the community, they not only might get fired, they might be held legally liable because they have no legal obligation to do that. Without corporate personhood, if we would get to a post-corporate personhood world, it would only take about one time for a community to rise up and say, we don't want these people being chartered anymore. They're coming in, they're leaving a wake of ruined lives and ruined earth. They're coming in, they're taking a whole lot more profit than they deserve out of the community. They're leaving sick and disabled workers. They're leaving environmental decay. I think of some meatpacking plants that are famous for setting up a plant, running it for a few years, and then closing down, firing all the workers, laying everybody off, reopening 50 miles down the road, hiring those same workers back at starting wages. And everything's fine. That's just the way you do things. That's the way you make money in this corporate personhood world. That kind of abuse is seen as normal, seen as healthy, seen as that's what business is about. If we return to a pre corporate personhood world where benefiting the community was part and parcel of incorporating. That's why the community, as I detailed in the last episode, that's why the community grants the privilege of incorporating two people, to a group of business people, is because they are doing something that is seen as beneficial to the community. And if it doesn't benefit the community, then they can be dechartered. Well, that was until 1886 with corporate personhood. If we went back to that previous system, it would only take about one time for some big corporation to just no longer be able to do business that they were doing in a state because they had been dechartered because the people said they just were too greedy, too abusive. They didn't have to prove it in court. They didn't have to get the permission of the Supreme Court. They could just say, we as a community don't like the way you do business. It wouldn't take any more than that every corporation would start taking community benefit a lot more seriously. Then those idealistic executives, I think young executives are probably mostly young, but the idealistic executives would get a hearing. When people were, when the idea of, well, maybe we shouldn't destroy this forest or maybe we shouldn't bust up this neighborhood, well, that would actually get a hearing because doing stuff in a cavalier manner, just running roughshod over communities and their interests, would no longer be seen as good business. If you wanted to, in that post-corporate personhood world, if you wanted to defend stockholder value, you would be sensitive to the wants and needs of the community. You would work in cooperation with them. And that would help to establish that whole roundtable of equal cooperative venture, that you're coming in as a group of business people, you're going to set up an enterprise, you're working with the community to do it in a way that makes it to where it does bring in good jobs, it does help the environment, it does you're making sure that workers' lives aren't ruined, and all of that is taken care of, and you're under an obligation to follow through with it. And finally, the big argument that we're going to hear, and this goes to big government too, but big business certainly, is that all of our high-tech civilization is dependent on this big business stuff. That without this, we wouldn't have the great, wonderful things we have. My first response to that is arguably the most important invention in the last 200 years has been the telephone. And it was invented in 1876, 10 years before corporate personhood. We didn't need big corporations in order to have that kind of an invention. What we needed was the patent office, and the patent office worked well. In fact, you can make a strong case that this centralization of business has actually impeded the progress of science. Now, another example I'll use along these lines is, I read an article in the local paper a number of years ago saying, well, we need these big agribusiness, we need these big international treaties, because look, these days we can get summer fruit during the middle of the winter. We get, honeydew melons and other summer fruits flowing up from Chile during our winters. And we wouldn't have that without these big international agreements. And to that, I respond, bananas. We've been getting bananas from the southern part of the world for a long time, and the reason we were getting bananas is because bananas don't ripen real fast and they can be put on a slow boat. The reason we're getting summer fruit is because not these big international treaties and the auspices of big corporations. The reason we can get summer fruit up here is because of technology. Because we've got jets that can fly it up here before it goes rotten. If you put it on a boat the same as you would with bananas, you have a boat full of rotten fruit by the time it gets here. These days, that because of the advance in technology, the advance in science, that's what we owe our high-tech civilization to. It's not big government. It's not big business. In fact, both of them may well be standing in the way. I think about, the way that they broke up AT&T. Ma Bell was one big company. Younger people don't remember that. In the early 80s, it was a very big controversy. Break up Ma Bell, break up AT&T, to make it be a whole bunch of smaller companies so they will compete with each other. I think if we hadn't done that, the Bell Telephone Company would have been sitting on so many billions of dollars worth of copper wire that they would have been slow to go along with the development of cell phones. Yeah, during the 80s and early 90s, it was a madhouse getting different systems, different, you know, subscribers you'd use and cards to dial long distance, and you had one for local calls and other for long distance and everything. But out of that chaos developed the cell phone system we have today. I don't think we would have developed it nearly as quickly or as fast if there hadn't been the breaking up of AT&T. Okay, all of that, you know, between bananas to cell phones and everything, the defenders of corporate personhood and big corporations will always try and sell us on this idea that we need them in order to have our civilization be good. And I think the opposite is true. If we were to end corporate personhood, put business back on that short leash of community accountability, okay, I think we would develop a much more healthy dynamic in the way businesses were chartered. And, you know, we could be very creative. I mean, I hear a lot of people saying, well, we should have this law about corporations and we should have that law about corporations. Some of them are really good ideas. None of them will fly as long as the Supreme Court says you can't regulate corporations because they're persons. Okay, that's why none of that, those other good ideas can come up because of that. If we would get rid of corporate personhood, you could have much better, much healthier regulation of corporations. Put corporations back on that short leash of community accountability, and in doing that, you would also put the industrial revolution back on a much shorter leash of community accountability. We wouldn't have to sit here and just be vulnerable to whatever experiments and whatever new technology comes down the pike that they want to use us as guinea pigs. We would have a much better say in that. That's why ending corporate personhood would really enhance our lives and bring about a much healthier economy and much healthier culture. And it wouldn't be anti-business. It wouldn't be socialism trying to kill the rich and take all their money. It would be just, let's be more reasonable. Let's put it back on that short leash of community accountability. Okay, that's really all I have to say in episode number 4. I will, as normal, go and review where we're going and what we're going to say next. And thank you for listening. Once again, my blog is titled lifeinafascistcountry.blogspot.com. If you want to read ahead, you can go to the first post that's listed there, How and Why to Save America. It's about 15, 20 posts in, so you have to navigate to it, or you can go directly to it on that address. And the corporate personhood is the same, lifeinafascistcountry.blogspot.com /2025/02/corporate personhood.html. And that'll take you to a lot of what I was saying and quite a bit more about corporate personhood. If you want to read ahead, you can do those things. Now, once again, we have finished the whole thing about the telegraph in 1844, the press being controlled by the wealthy, corporate personhood, and what would life be like after corporate personhood. We've yet to go to 16th and 17th Amendment. Government by experts under Wilson, FDR, fascist coup, and Social Security and socialism. 1947, the First Amendment was completely twisted out of all recognition. And because of that, the loss of local community moral self-government. And then and those lessons is when it's going to start wrapping into what exactly, how good America was and why it's worth saving again, and what it would look like if we did that, and go on to how to affect the reforms and refounding. It's being talked about here, and even more, how to actually get past the power of the media over us by establishing a public forum. That's about it for now. Next time, would be going into the 16th and 17th Amendments and really looking at how much one of these usurpations kind of fed into and convinced people to go with the next one, and how that made it worse and fed into the next, and then into the next. How there's been a bad dynamic from the very beginning, and how it all worked against us. Thank you. Be sure and share this.